10 Medieval Inventions that Changed the World. You won't believe. Imagine living in a world where wearing 5 layers of wool is your best defense against freezing to death. Where your morning routine includes scraping ice off your bed and praying your wooden shack didn't collapse overnight. Back then, your biggest worry wasn't just getting to work on time. It was surviving another day without turning into a human popsicle. Forget cozy blankets and space heaters. Survival in the medieval world meant braving the cold with whatever you could find, usually a combination of wool, animal skins, and sheer stubbornness. But wait, did people just sit there and suffer? Or did they actually figure out some way to make life a little less brutal? Turns out, medieval folks were more inventive than we give them credit for. Some of the gadgets and ideas they came up with weren't just survival tricks. They were the foundation of things we still use today. And trust me, you're not going to believe some of the things they came up with. You'd be surprised how many of our modern comforts started in those dark, chilly, and surprisingly inventive times. Revolution in words. Before the internet, before newspapers, there was the printing press. And no, it wasn't just for spreading holy texts. Imagine this. You've just spent months, maybe years, painstakingly handwriting a single book. Your hand cramps, your ink smudges, and by the end of it, you're not even sure if you spelled the king's name right. Now, imagine doing that 100 times over. Actually, don't bother imagining, because unless you were a monk with nothing better to do, you wouldn't have a personal library in the first place. And then, out of nowhere, along comes the printing press. Suddenly, books aren't just rare handwritten treasures, they're mass-produced, available to anyone who could read. It wasn't just about convenience, it was a full-on revolution. People could finally share ideas without needing to hand-copy every single word. You'd think everyone would be thrilled, right? Wrong. To the elite, it was terrifying. The printing press was seen as dangerous, a threat to the status quo. If anyone could read, then anyone could think for themselves. And that, my friends, was a big problem. The upper class didn't want commoners discussing philosophy or questioning the church. It was like introducing social media to a village that still believes in witchcraft. Suddenly, everyone's sharing ideas, and nobody knows how to control it. The printing press didn't just make books more accessible, it made ideas contagious, and once people started reading, there was no way to make them unread. It was a complete game changer, and while it didn't instantly turn peasants into scholars, it did open the door to a whole new world of information and controversy. The mechanical clock. When time didn't really matter. Time is money, unless you're a medieval peasant, in which case time is just another freezing hour of work. Back then, keeping track of time wasn't exactly a priority. You woke up with the sun, worked until it dipped below the horizon, and that was pretty much your schedule. But then came the mechanical clock, a marvel of gears, weights, and sheer determination. The funny thing? The first mechanical clocks didn't even have minute hands. Why? Because who cared about precision when your day was basically one long grind from dawn till dusk? It was like someone inventing a smartwatch that only tells you the month. Not super helpful, but hey, it's progress. And the best part? These clocks were huge, clunky, and usually mounted on towers where everyone could see and hear them. The whole town would know it's noon because the bell would practically shake the building. Imagine that today. Your phone's battery dies at 10%, so you just estimate the rest of your day. That's basically how medieval folks handled time. Despite their flaws, mechanical clocks represented something new. The idea that time could be measured and managed. It wasn't just about knowing when to eat or pray. It was about structuring life itself. Sure, they didn't have the precision we're used to, but they were the first step toward making every minute count, or at least every vaguely measured chunk of time. Eyeglasses, seeing the world, sort of. You think squinting at your screen is bad? Try hunting with blurry vision while wolves lurk nearby. That's medieval life for you. Surviving in the wild with eyesight that could barely tell a bear from a boulder. But of course, the real problem wasn't just about seeing the world. It was about seeing tiny, cramped handwriting on parchment. That's where eyeglasses came into play. And guess who needed them the most? Monks. Not because they were out there chasing deer or dodging wolves, but because they spent their days hunched over manuscripts, copying line after line by candlelight. Their eyesight was practically doomed from the start. These early eyeglasses weren't about seeing the world clearly, they were about not going blind from squinting at tiny Latin script. Think of it as the medieval version of blue light glasses, but without the Netflix. You got eye strain from binge watching, they had eye strain from writing out the Book of Psalms for the 100th time. Honestly, if monks had known about binge watching, they might have invented something even stronger. Eyeglasses didn't just make reading easier, they marked a shift in how people thought about aging and vision. Suddenly, getting older didn't mean giving up reading entirely. It just meant strapping on a pair of awkward heavy lenses and getting back to work. Practical, a bit clunky, but undeniably life-changing. Survival through innovation. More than just plagues and pitchforks. Turns out, the medieval world wasn't just about plagues and pitchforks, it was about figuring out how to live one more day. From printing ideas to keeping track of time, and even just seeing straight, these inventions didn't just make life easier, they made it possible. But medieval ingenuity didn't stop at books, clocks, and eyeglasses. Oh no, some inventions went beyond comfort and convenience. They were about pure survival. So let's talk about some inventions that didn't just improve life, they saved it. Gunpowder imported chaos that changed everything. Why invent something when you can just import chaos from the East? That's basically how Europe discovered gunpowder. It wasn't even their own idea, it was brought over from China, where it had already been causing enough trouble. But once Europeans got their hands on it, they didn't just sit around marveling at the explosions. They went all in. Gunpowder transformed European warfare faster than you can say boom. Suddenly, knights in shiny armor weren't so impressive when faced with cannons that could blast through castle walls. Castles that once seemed impenetrable now crumbled under the force of gunpowder artillery. Armies stopped relying solely on swords and archery and started loading up on gunpowder weapons, changing the entire strategy of war. It's like the medieval version of discovering energy drinks. Suddenly everyone's a little too excited, running around and occasionally blowing things up. The chaos was almost too much to handle. Warfare went from hand-to-hand combat to artillery barrages, and it didn't take long for everyone to realize that whoever had more gunpowder had the upper hand. It wasn't just an invention, it was a complete game changer, and, as usual, once it caught on, there was no going back. Europe learned pretty quickly that you don't just import gunpowder, you import an entirely new way of fighting. Castles with ventilation systems, medieval climate control. Picture yourself in a giant stone fridge. Cold, damp, and reeking of smoke. You're wrapped in layers of wool, trying not to breathe too deeply because the air smells like a mix of wet straw and yesterday's stew. Now, add a little medieval ingenuity, because even in those drafty fortresses, people figured out how to make life slightly less miserable. Surprisingly, castles weren't just piles of rocks slapped together to keep enemies out. They had some clever design features too. One of the most impressive? Ventilation systems. Yep, they actually put thought into directing smoke out while keeping some warmth in. The fireplaces were built with chimneys that funneled the smoke upwards and out, while the stone walls absorbed heat and slowly released it. Kind of like a medieval heat sink. Think of it as the medieval version of central heating, but with more rats. Instead of cozy radiators, you got stone floors that sometimes managed to feel slightly less freezing. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but compared to having smoke fill every room, it was a major upgrade. Plus, having a bit of warmth linger was a lifesaver when the outside felt like an icebox. So next time you're shivering in your drafty apartment, just remember, at least you're not in a stone fortress with a questionable ventilation system and a family of rats claiming squatters' rights. Innovations that change daily life. Small comforts, big impact. From protecting power to staying warm, medieval folks weren't just survivors, they were practical innovators. They didn't just sit around waiting for life to get easier, they figured out ways to make their harsh world a little more bearable. Whether it was building stronger fortresses or finding ways to keep the cold out, they were always looking for solutions. But what about the little things? The gadgets that made daily life a bit less miserable? Sure, grand inventions like gunpowder and castles are impressive, but sometimes it's the small, everyday innovations that really change how people live. Let's dive into the practical side of medieval ingenuity. The stuff that didn't just save lives, but made them a bit more comfortable. Spectacles for reading, seeing the past a bit clearer. Imagine trying to read ancient scrolls by candlelight, while your eyesight is as bad as your luck. That's pretty much the situation medieval monks found themselves in. They spent their days hunched over manuscripts, squinting at tiny, faded texts, trying not to mix up sacred passages just because their vision was slowly giving up on them. So, naturally, someone had to invent a solution. Enter spectacles, crude, clunky, but absolutely revolutionary. These weren't the sleek, stylish glasses we have today, they were more like awkward, heavy lenses balanced on your nose, but they did the job. Basically, medieval monks just needed to binge-read ancient texts without squinting, and spectacles made that possible. It wasn't about fashion or looking scholarly, it was pure necessity. You couldn't preserve knowledge if you couldn't see the words. These spectacles were mostly used for reading and writing, not for seeing the world more clearly. Imagine having a pair just to get through a single prayer book. Yet, despite their basic design, they marked a huge leap forward in how people thought about aging and vision. Spectacles didn't just make life a little easier, They made sure that knowledge didn't fade away just because someone's eyesight did, and for medieval monks, that meant one less reason to accidentally rewrite history with a few blurry mistakes. Watermills, turning rivers into power. A river running through town wasn't just scenic, it was power on tap. In the medieval world, water wasn't just for drinking or washing, it was a source of serious mechanical energy. People looked at a flowing river and thought, hey, what if we made that do all the hard work for us? And thus, the watermill was born. Imagine grinding your morning coffee with a river. Efficient, but wet. That's basically how medieval watermills worked. Instead of manually crushing grain, they used the force of flowing water to turn massive stone wheels, grinding wheat into flour with minimal effort. It wasn't just for grain either. Watermills powered sawmills, pumped water, and even ran basic machines. The best part? Once the wheel was set in motion, it kept going as long as the river did. No backbreaking labor, no constant supervision, just the river doing its thing while people got on with other tasks. It was like having a medieval power plant, just without the electric bill. Watermills didn't just make life easier, they completely changed how communities worked. Towns built around rivers became hubs of productivity, attracting trade and people looking for work. It wasn't just about convenience, it was about harnessing nature to make life a little more manageable. In a world where most tasks were done by hand, that was nothing short of revolutionary. Windmills, the original eco-warriors. Who needs bigli when you've got hawa kita kat? Basik problem, hawa ka intizar. Windmills serve gandum, bisne keli nehititi. Yes, sawmills, chalatiti, au papani pomkatiti. Ajke turbans kita, lekinus samane mine environment, friendly honeka concept nahita. Who knew medieval folks were inventing their way to survival one gadget at a time? From printing presses that sparked intellectual revolutions to watermills that turned rivers into power, these inventions weren't just clever, they were essential. Life in the medieval world wasn't just about surviving harsh conditions, it was about finding ways to make that survival just a little bit easier. Maybe they weren't so different from us, figuring out how to make life a little easier, one invention at a time. Sure, they didn't have smartphones or Wi-Fi, but they had the creativity to turn simple ideas into groundbreaking changes. They made mistakes, tried weird solutions, and sometimes stumbled onto genius. It's almost like a medieval version of hacking life, just with fewer gadgets and a lot more wool. Which invention surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more historical surprises. Let's keep digging into the past to find out how people back then weren't just surviving, they were thriving, one weird and wonderful invention at a time.